It was just a normal day, normal thing every mom does. We went to get Valentine's and get funny birthday cards for Scott's 21st birthday. We would turn it into a mommy-daughter night and go get Valentine's and go get some dinner together. So I was like, well, Kirsten, I guess it's just you and I, baby. And I said, we'll have fun, just you and me. We walked in and it was really quiet and it just felt weird. We walked through the door and heard a really loud blast and saw a really bright light flash. I felt somebody come in behind me, and so I looked over my right shoulder and there was this kid. And I looked up at him and he looked down at me. And he just lifted his gun and he cocked it and shot me. It just like smashed me into the concrete. I remember my ears just screaming. Kirsten was on the floor on her side. So I pulled myself on my stomach across the floor over to her, and he shoved the butt of the gun into my low back and shot me again. I looked up at Kirsten just in time for him to put the gun to the side of her head, and it shot the whole back of her head off. And my face and her face were less than a foot away when he did that.
We have come a long way. We have made much progress, but not near enough.
If you're convicted of a felony, you shouldn't have one. If you're a fugitive from the law, you shouldn't have a gun. If you're stalking or harassing women or children, you shouldn't have a gun. And if you commit an act of violence against your spouse or your child, you shouldn't have a gun.
Quiet town, good schools, friendly people, kind of a classic New England town. We moved here in 2003. At that time, my daughters were 6 and 2. So we're coming up on Main Street. So this is the corner of Main Street and Churchill. We've got the flagpole right in the middle of the street. It's a great place to raise kids. You know, on Halloween, for example, they close this road and all the homes open up their houses to the kids and for trick-or-treating. And there'll be thousands of kids up and down the street with their parents. Never imagined that this town would be plastered all over the news, all over the world. You know, before the events that occurred here in 2012, you know, people asked you where you're from, and I said Newtown, Connecticut, or Sandy Hook, Connecticut. You know, most people had never even heard of it. Now you tell people you're from Newtown and you get the gasp.
27 dead, 20 children, 7 adults, including the principal.
Ambulances, stretchers.
Photographers, producers, and correspondents on the way to this.
Impossible to believe here or anywhere else. But this story is really about their home, here, Newtown, Connecticut. And it's not just about how many were lost, it's about the age. What is hitting everyone so hard is the reality of these being children that were targeted by a madman.
It's still very hard for me to talk about. I still have a hard time talking about it and saying what happened.
You know, having kids in your care during something like that, right? I mean, that, like, there are no words to describe what that felt like.
We were lucky that, you know, he took a left into one classroom and not a right into another, and that he killed himself. The police were there quickly enough that he killed himself before he could do any more damage. You know, 154 shots in under 3 minutes in classrooms with 6-year-old children does a lot of damage, and it's unspeakable.
Kids in the Sandy Hook school heard the shooting, heard it all. It was on, you know, the intercom was on and it was all over the school. Those are not experiences and memories that should take place in people's childhood.
You know, you listen to people talk and they're arranging play dates around therapy visits, and, you know, it's a different, our kids are growing up a different way than they were 2 years ago.
My daughter's third grade teacher was Vicky Soto, who was a brand new teacher who came into the class after the regular teacher went on maternity leave. And, you know, my daughter and Vicky became good friends. They really liked each other. And then my daughter's in 4th grade, they stayed close. And, you know, having to explain to my 11-year-old daughter that her 3rd grade teacher was killed is not a conversation that that any parent, you know, really should have. And, you know, that's a conversation that's gonna, it's gonna haunt me for the rest of my life.
Never seen the nation's conscience so shaken by what happened at Sandy Hook. The world has changed, and it's demanding action.
I'm Alec McGillis. I'm a journalist. I used to work at the Baltimore Sun. I now work at Slate magazine. After that terrible tragedy happened, there was a whole debate about, well, how do we proceed? What kind of legislation can we pursue to basically reduce the odds of future terrible gun violence, even though that was not an issue in the Newtown shooting.
Because while there is no law or set of laws that can prevent every senseless act of violence completely, no piece of legislation that will prevent every tragedy, every act of evil, if there's even one thing we can do to reduce this violence, if there's even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try.
They talked with the criminal justice folks and the law enforcement folks and said, what can we do that's going to reduce gun violence in America, this terrible problem we have with gun violence?
The cabinet members and I sat down with 229 groups, not just individuals, representing groups, 229 groups, from law enforcement agencies to public health officials to gun officials to gun advocacy groups.
And they decided, look, the thing that is most realistic for us to pursue is to close the gun show loophole.
If you want to buy a gun, whether it's from a licensed dealer or a private seller, you should at least have to show you are not a felon or somebody legally prohibited from buying one.
I'm Daniel Webster. I'm a professor and director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research. Some talk about the so-called gun show loophole, and I actually don't even like the term loophole because it sounds like, oh, it's like this little clause or something. What it really is, it's a gaping hole. We do require background checks and a whole accountability on the part of federally licensed firearm dealers. And anybody who does business with them will have to pass a background check. But in most of our states, we allow everybody else who might have a gun sell them with no means of accountability whatsoever.
First, it's time for Congress to require a universal background check for anyone trying to buy a gun.
My name is Colin Goddard. I'm a survivor of the shooting at Virginia Tech in 2007, and now I'm a senior policy advocate at Everytown for Gun Safety. Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey background checks compromise was a bill that was devised after Newtown with a conservative Democrat, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, NRA A-rated senator, and Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, NRA A-rated senator, who put together a true compromise background checks bill and introduced it in the Senate.
My name's Martina Lines, and I'm a gun violence prevention advocate in Virginia. We had the president behind us, the vice president, the attorney general, the overwhelming majority of the American public. We had the majority of the Senate with us, so we really thought finally we were going to get this bill through.
It comes up in the Senate and it gets 55 votes, which is a majority in the Senate.
We had 55 votes. In a normal democracy, 55 out of 100 is the majority that you need to move on.
But that's not enough to break a filibuster. In the Senate, you need 60 votes.
Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
They were 5 votes short.
We had 91% of the American public backing this bill, backing background checks. Yet we've seen that just far too often, the will of the majority is not what happens.
The motion is entered.
Unfortunately, that's sort of become the nature of American politics now. It's the special interests with the deep pockets that flex their muscle, and sadly, there are just too many people elected to represent us that are not. Instead, they're representing corporate gun industry profits.
A few minutes ago, a minority in the United States Senate decided it wasn't worth it. They blocked common sense gun reforms even while these families looked on from the Senate gallery. Instead of supporting this compromise, the gun lobby and its allies willfully lied about the bill. They claimed that it would create some sort of big brother gun registry, even though the bill did the opposite. So all in all, this was a pretty shameful day for Washington.
There's one. We got one ticket left. Who wants one ticket? And we're going to draw on the wall of guns.
Timbers, Colts, Henrys, Rugers, you name it. Now we expect a bunch of excitement if you happen to be the winner.
Looks like Brenda Denny.
Congratulations, Brenda.
There you go.
You are our next Wall of Guns winner.
I'm here for the gun show. Gadgets, the latest technology and new things. So I'm just here for the gun show, not necessarily to buy a gun or anything like that. I've been carrying almost every day since I was age 21. It's just for self-protection.
Been around guns my whole life, since I was a very, very young child.
I've had firearms since I was 14.
I was raised with them, hunting, shooting for fun, shooting for sports.
I grew up with guns. My dad had guns. My dad was a federal firearms dealer.
Well, I'm kind of a gun guy. My views probably aren't mainstream, but sure would be nice if they were.
I can tell you when I go out without carrying my gun, I'm in fear for my life. I am every day, because you can't trust anybody anymore, and that's the way it is.
Millions of people coming in illegally. We've got to stop it at the border, and we have to stop it fast. And we are seeing an unprecedented threat to our liberties each and every day. NRA, the men and women here are men and women of action. You are leaders who stand and fight.
What's the point of registering lawful gun owners anyway? So newspapers can print those names and addresses for gangs and criminals to access? It's going to be people like you and me. That's who their check will be. That's what they're after. The names of good, decent people all over this great country. There are only two reasons for government to create that federal registry of gun owners: to tax them or to take them.
What we've seen in all of our polls is that what gun owners want is very, very different from what the gun lobby is promoting.
It used to be an organization that was about hunting and sport shooting and taught firearm safety and was a rather principled organization. At one time, they even supported background checks.
The NRA helped pass some of the first good gun laws this country's seen. The ban on fully automatic weapons, the 1968 Gun Control Act, which established for the first time that there are certain people who should not own firearms. The NRA supported that bill.
A number of people who own guns has actually steadily declined in the United States. We're not a hunting society like we used to be, so they have to find new markets for their guns.
The NRA did not receive any money from the industry. It was separate. They received money from their dues-paying members, and that was it. And now, they receive tens of millions of dollars each year from the industry.
What's your views about background checks?
Personally, I'm a big gun advocate, lifetime member of the NRA, but I feel like anyone purchasing a gun should have a background check, because anything we can do to keep them out of the wrong hands is a good thing, in my opinion.
I personally think that background checks are a good thing for handguns or just about anything else that has the possibility of lethalness to it.
I think they need to be in place for sure, because it keeps sick people from having guns. People that are felons or have a mental disorder kind of a thing, yeah, they should be carrying guns.
I think that they're absolutely necessary. I don't want some crazy person walking the street with a gun.
I think it helps weed out the people that don't need to have a firearm, like the mentally ill, convicted felons, that kind of thing.
I'm for less restriction through background checks, but I believe that there needs to be accountability. So I would say yes, I'm for it.
I'm for it for the most part. I mean, there's got to be some level of accountability out there for people wanting to go in and get, and to buy firearms the way that they need to. I mean, I've been used to background checks since, forever, and glad for it.
At least 80% of gun owners support universal background checks for any gun transaction. So the only way that if you're the gun lobby and you're trying to prevent that you win is that you change the subject. Because if talking about background checks is a loser for the gun lobby, well, let's change the subject to, do you think the government should be able to take your guns away from you? That's an easy one to win. Should the government be able to take something of somebody's? I don't care if you own guns or you don't own guns in the United States. People don't like that.
May 12, 2013. You wake up, it's parade morning, you start getting everybody together, members start calling you on the telephone. You can kind of feel the momentum, the vibe. It was beautiful weather for that day. We let the cheering out, man, the cheering, they jumping and dancing, they doing their thing, they ready. I mean, the atmosphere is right. That day we had a good band, we was partying. We were rolling, we was getting on our way to get around the corner. It was coming down, the parade was jumping, and the crowd was rocking with it. This is happening, it's going down. I get to this point, so I stop the whole band. As the second I raised my hand to stop the band, pop, 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 shooting everywhere.
At least 12 people are shot as gunmen open fire at a Mother's Day second line.
Over 300 people participating.
2 10-year-old children have been wounded during a shooting at a Mother's Day.
I was, as always, attending the second line for that Sunday. And then all of a sudden, we heard the shooting. For a second, I froze. I looked up and I saw one of the shooters, and I was really taken aback by how much he looked at that moment like my nephew. And the other shooter was also, I guess, spraying the crowd, and one of his bullets hit me.
Young lady laying in the street, Miss Cotton, shot. Young men laying on the corner, shot. Up the street, you got the little girl and her dad and the other young man shot. You got folks all the way up as far as you can see. Folks been home, been hurt. This is my parade, this is my neighborhood. It's not supposed to happen like this.
I was in the hospital for about a month and a half. The doctors, told me that they did not expect me to live, that I had really grave injuries that people don't usually survive. I lost a couple of organs and several partial organs, and they had to really reconstruct me internally. I'm just sort of struggling along daily with, these random but chronic bouts of nausea. The young man who shot up the Mother's Day parade, it's not surprising that they had charges against them that should have prevented them from even having guns. We definitely have to have stronger laws around who has access and what kind of firearms we have access to.
amazingly average when it comes to high-income nations. Even risk factors like alcohol abuse, serious mental illness, we're either in the middle or in some cases actually on the low end of the spectrum. What makes us so unique is that our murder rate is roughly 7 times higher. That's because our firearm-related homicide rates are 20 times higher. What we have is a lethal violence problem. There's a lot more dangerous people with guns. Probably 2/3 of those individuals have some sort of offense, some sort of clear indicator in their background that probably too risky for them to have a gun.
It took me forever to learn how to do this again. I was in hand therapy for a year because I couldn't do any of this. I couldn't even hold a toothbrush. Okay. There you go. People tease me for being slow because they're like, you're a dawdler, but they don't realize, like, my hand is numb. So holding this and doing this stuff is really, really difficult. It's like a lot of just eye-hand coordination to not stab me in the eye, which I do quite often.
There's 4 kids in the family. My older brother, me, and then the older of, Kate, and Kirsten was the younger.
Kirsten was only in kindergarten, and they were all in elementary school. So it was just me and them against the world, and I was working really hard to support them. They were really close because they were in high school ages together. Kirsten was a sophomore, Kate was a senior. And so we just were really close. Trying to making life happen together.
Carolyn is my mom, and we're really, really, really close.
It takes me hours to get beautiful, and I'm not, it takes me hours to be average. My whole motto about life is to make memories and have fun, especially with the people that you love. It's easier to feel joy if I'm put together. If I'm walking around in my sweats, it's easier to remember that I'm sick. I just fake it with makeup and curlers. And I'm in a lot of pain all the time. I'm nauseous and sick all the time. But I don't want people to be able to see it when I walk around.
18-year-old showed up at the mall in Salt Lake and began shooting people randomly. He killed 5 and wounded several others.
The suspect in this particular circumstance had one thing in his mind, and that was to kill a large number of people.
Family members are now trying to make sense of what happened.
The one that he shot Kirsten and my mom with, he got at a pawn shop. He was 17 at the time, and you have to be 18 to buy a shotgun. Wasn't a U.S. citizen. His family had told us how he had been really sick for a long time, but he went in. The guy knew that if he ran a background check on this guy, it wouldn't pass because he was underage. But he wanted the commission and sold it to him anyway, didn't fill out the paperwork, didn't do the background check, didn't file the paperwork. When they went to court, he said that he sold it to him because he thought he was going to rob a bank with it, not murder somebody. I think they got like 30 days in prison maximum and a $500 fine. We were appalled. We're like, how are these laws, they seem so outdated, and we couldn't believe that that's where the laws were, but we didn't know where to even begin to change them or that they could be changed.
So we went and talked to senators, told them we wanted to have them sign the bill to have expanded background checks on all gun sales. Basically, they didn't want to see us. They were very condescending. The senators didn't say to our face, but their people that work for them would say, you know, he's not interested in signing.
We met with Mike Lee, and we told him our story, and you could tell that it affected him. And then he left the room, and one of his staff members was like, he's not going to do anything to change it. Thank you for your time. And we met with Orrin Hatch next, and he wouldn't even meet with us. It was one of his staff members who used to be in law enforcement listened to us, and she's like, I completely agree with everything you're fighting for, but with the elections coming up and people wanting certain things, that she's like, I don't think he's going to do anything about it. I don't think he'll attach his name to what you guys are trying to accomplish.
So it just felt like we just kept hitting wall after wall. I had no idea how hard it was to make things happen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck.
We looked at two policy changes around a similar policy, this permit to purchase requirement for handgun transactions that is a mechanism to require background checks. So Missouri had that law in place since the 1920s, and lawmakers decided to repeal the law at the end of August of 2007. So immediately following the repeal of that law, firearm homicide rates went up 25%. And if you look at all the states that surround Missouri, there was no significant increase in any of those states. It was unique to Missouri. Now, when Connecticut adopted their very similar policy, and over the 10 years following that law, we estimate a 40% reduction in firearm homicide rates. We think that background check requirements is protective. It keeps guns from dangerous people, and fewer people die.
I always know my exits. I always know where somebody could potentially come in and where I can get out. Obviously, I have therapists, and I go to therapy, and I do all sorts of those kinds of things. Nobody tells you how to deal with this stuff. I'm a realistic person, and I handle every situation with reality. I walk around, everyone's got their face buried in their phones, they got their earphones in, they can't even hear anything that's going on around them. Not even sure if they'd be able to hear a gunshot if it went off because they blast their music so loud. And that's the hardest part, is that I can sit there and tell myself over and over and over and over and over that it's not gonna happen. But there's this small part in the back of my mind that tells me, well, it wasn't supposed to happen the first time. Even though the chances of it happening are 1 in a million, all it takes is one. I had just finished playing a game of Capture the Flag. We were walking to our next activity, and we came down the main hall of the building, and a man walked in the front door and was face to face with us.
11 o'clock this morning at the Jewish Community Center, a gunman walked into the lobby and opened fire.
A 16-year-old young woman shot twice in the leg. A 68-year-old woman, she was shot in the arm. And a 5-year-old who was shot in the right flank and then suffered a through shot, affecting the abdomen and the back. The little boy has been in the operating room clinging to life. Doctors and nurses have been on full alert, responding to one of the worst incidents of its type.
So I got a phone call about, I guess it was about 9:30 in the morning, saying something's going on. There was a shooting, something, I don't know. So when I got to the hospital, they had already taken care of his leg because a bullet had gone right through his leg. And they had set it and put it in a cast. He had no concept of the crime. It was quite a few years, I think, before he understood the full impact of who this man was, why he was trying to do the things he was trying to do.
I think this one was very, so cute.
Yeah.
Picture. And yeah, and this was the day he was being discharged from the hospital.
I always knew that I was shot. And it took a long time for me to realize why. And that was a hard realization to come to. Why me, you know? What did I do? This was literally just random.
So, I mean, that's so sad when you think that a kid, you know, I always say this, that kids are afraid of the boogeyman, and lots of kids are afraid of the boogeyman under the bed, but for our kids, the boogeyman was real.
Ever since I can remember, I had been shot. So it's hard for me to know a life without that. And that's something I have to constantly remind myself of, that not everyone lives in this constant fear of death.
My name's Mike Sostruck. I'm the chief of the Portland Police Department here in Maine. The state of Maine is a very safe place, you know, constantly in that top 3 safest states in the nation, and Portland's a safe place to live. But firearm violence impacts us all, and you just never know when you're gonna be in that situation. I think one example that we can talk of for sure is the homicide involving Darian Richardson.
We live in South Portland, Maine, and we raised our family here.
Well, it's a great neighborhood. I mean, at the time we moved here, there was a lot of other young children here, so we had plenty of kids to play with. And we have a pool in the backyard. So we always, in summertime, we always had kids over here swimming. And the school's within walking distance. Ocean's 15 minutes away.
We wanted to live and raise our kids in that kind of atmosphere. We had 2 girls, a year apart, good daughters, typical little girls. Darian, our oldest daughter, was 25 years old. She had her own place in Portland, Maine.
We became friends when we were 3, and she and I would run back and forth between our parents' yards and play. We just grew up having a normal childhood, swimming in the summer, going to the beach.
She had parents that were going to make sure that she did the right thing.
And they're just wonderful people.
On January 8th, 2010, 2 mass intruders came into our house, came into our bedroom, and started shooting.
She told me that she woke up in the middle of the night and she remembered seeing a silhouette in her doorway. And right around the time she stood up, she knew something wasn't right. She put her hand up. And then she said she saw the flash of the gun.
Got to the hospital and she was in intensive care, and you know, she was awake. And so we say, you know, thank God she's alive.
She was scared. She was traumatized. In one night, her whole life was turned upside down. A few seconds, actually. And then now ours, you know. We were all like, she's gonna get over this and get better.
She's walking up and down the stairs, she's doing well, and she's just getting antsy. When she left the door, I said, I love you.
Yeah.
That's the last words.
And they said later it was a pulmonary embolism, so, from the gunshot wounds.
Several months later, we have another homicide in Portland, and we average less than 3 a year. So we got 2 homicides within 3 months. A big piece of any investigation is finding the murder weapon. Well, in this case, we find, a .45 caliber handgun in the ditch, a few houses down from that second homicide site. So from our perspective, we're thinking this is good news to have a very tangible piece of evidence that we can follow up on.
They called us into the station and sat us down and said, we found the gun. I said, great.
We were hopeful. We kept saying, they're going to get to the bottom of this. He'll say where he got it, and we'll have some end to that part.
And ultimately, we find out that the same handgun was used in those two different homicides within the city of Portland within a few months. And then when we backtrack the ownership of that firearm, we come up to one of the owners who says, yeah, I sold it at a gun show. I don't know who I sold it to. I don't even remember really when I sold it to him, but I did, and sorry. So there's no documentation whatsoever, and that what would be seen as a very hot lead to have that murder weapon dried up immediately.
If you sell a gun without a check, you don't have to say who you sold it to. He's not breaking the laws technically, and that's just wrong.
There's an investigation going on, and the police is talking to you, say the gun that you sold to somebody was used in a crime. And how can a guy say, no, I don't know? I mean, how can you live with yourself?
What people should be worried about is a person that killed someone. The person that killed Darian is out walking among us.
And if he's that brazen to break into the house at middle of the night and shoot somebody, he could do that again.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a scary thought for folks. It certainly was very frustrating for us as law enforcement officers.
So how many guns are sold every year with these loopholes?
That's a really good question, and honestly, our data are bad. They're old. They go back to the roughly 20 years ago. But what's more important, and what we found, is that nearly 80% of criminals who use guns to commit violent crimes got them through private transactions. Right now, we make it really easy. Fire up the internet. There's lots of websites out there, and advertise, hey, I've got such and such gun. I am a private seller. No background checks required.
Maine is the end, really, of what they call an iron pipeline, right? So let's say you're in a different state with stronger gun laws. So you can't go on the open market in your own state to buy a firearm without a background check. So I'll just go a few states north to Maine, buy firearms, and then bring them back. You can make a lot of money.
States with strict gun control laws, hardly any of their guns are going anywhere, and yet some guns are traveling hundreds of miles to be used in crime. It's very difficult to have any system of accountability because there's no background check, there's no record. People say, oh, well, that just tells us that they just get around these laws, so why have them? But it's a rather circular logic because they go to those private sellers because we've made it easy for them to.
People that get shot with shotguns 3 times don't live through it. And most people who have lead embedded in them usually die from it if they don't remove it. Like right now, I'm very aware of where I was shot. My back pain is bad, but, and like down my leg, where the hole was, is really painful. And like in my stomach where all the lead is, I can feel it really hurts. Like in the very beginning, after I came home, and they told us that because of the lead poisoning, that I most likely will be in a care facility in 5 to 10 years because of what it would do to my brain. a lot of the stuff I can't afford to take it all the time, so sometimes I don't get what I need. Like the lead medication. I haven't taken that for several months because I ran out and it's just too expensive.
We're gonna just go ahead and review your medications.
Okay.
And you're just gonna let me know whether or not you're still taking these, okay?
Okay.
So we have the meloxicam.
Yes.
Phentermine.
Yes.
Okay. Gabapentin.
Yes.
Okay. And then we have Levocin.
Occasionally.
Okay. And we have the omeprazole.
Yes.
Okay. I also have Zofran
Yes.
for nausea. All right. So those are the meds I have on file.
Just sprayed through my kidneys and my organs and my spine, my pelvic area. My left kidney is full of them. My spine, it shot the back of my pelvic bone off. Just that whole flank area is full of lead shot. There's no way they could dig around for all those. They told me that would kill me to try to dig for those.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
During the meetings that we held, we met with a young man who's here today. I think Colin Goddard is here. Where are you, Colin? Colin was one of the survivors of the Virginia Tech massacre. He was in the classroom. He was shot 4 times on that day, and he has 3 bullets that are still inside him. And when I asked Colin about what he thought we should be doing, he said, I'm not here because of what happened to me. I'm here because of what happened to me. It keeps happening to other people, and we have to do something about it.
I heard this narrative develop in the media that, if only someone had a gun with them in that classroom, that the whole shooting could have ended early and people's lives could have been saved. And, I kept thinking, I wonder if they talked to anybody who was there and get their perspective, because from my perspective and anyone that I know who survived, that's not a good idea to now all of a sudden change policies and allow students to carry guns on campus. At the same time, I was also kept hearing, other ideas like background checks for all gun sales get discussed in Congress, and everyone kind of shoot it down and say it's a non-starter, it's not going to go anywhere. And I was like, what gives? Why is that the case? Why can't we have a conversation around background checks? I had meetings with legislators and was told, sorry, we can't support this. And was, as the issue clicked in my brain and thought it was so common sense, I was shut down and denied from a lot of elected officials in DC. And unfortunately, too many more who said, I support you, but don't make me do this now, because they don't want to get into a fight with the NRA before they have to.
It is shocking how bullying their tactics are. We've been in hearings where important bills are being discussed, and the legislators will even take a vote and vote in favor of a sensible bill. For example, one to keep guns out of the hands of convicted domestic violence abusers. And then we've seen the lobbyists for the NRA come and just berate the Republicans that voted for the bill and pull them out into the hall and tell them they had to change their vote. They don't want any legislation passed at all related to guns unless it's to weaken an existing law.
There's definitely been fluctuations over time in gun violence in the United States. So if you're just, someone who's just consuming the news, your perception is we live in a violent world, it's just as violent now as it was before, and so we just sort of live in this state of fear. And, news media benefit from that, gun industry certainly benefits from that.
In a sense, it's easier to write about this problem, write about this issue, if you can just accept the narrative of an all-powerful NRA. That way, it's simpler. It's a simpler story to tell. The more the media talks about an issue being a loser, the more it becomes a loser. This is America. We like winners. You don't want to be associated with an issue that's considered a loser. The media has a tendency to overstate the depth of that constituency.
We were part of a town hall, supposed to be a discussion. So I stood up and I said, no one talks about the victims. We talk about the right and, the right of us to have your gun and people that want some laws, but what about the people that are being hurt? A few times we've been sort of bullied on Facebook. One person wrote, your dead daughter doesn't trump my right to bear arms.
It's really frustrating, and especially when it's a bunch of people who haven't had it happen to them.
The claim on one side is, oh, that's a mechanism to create a registry that then will be used to disarm you. We've been doing background checks since 1994, and there's no registry. There's actually written into federal law that you may not have a registry.
We know that a lot of the American public reacts to fear. So it's fear-mongering, and they will make these blanket statements that, we're all gun grabbers, and we're trying to take away their weapons, and we're trying to repeal the Second Amendment, and it's just all complete fallacy.
The more damaging result is you end up with a just even sort of more angry and paranoid citizenry and electorate in the country, and more people who do not trust their neighbor, do not trust their local government, their state government, their federal government, because they've been told not to. And that's just, you can't really run a country that way.
The gun manufacturers or the guys who's making weapons believe they have a right. The guys who purchase them believe they have a right. They got groups like the NRA that feel they have a right to bear arms. But then nobody believes that I have a right as a human being, because the guns that they are not watching are drifting off in my neighborhood, and then my son is dying, my cousin's son is dying. How many more times do I have to go through friends and family funerals before somebody else even take a look?
I think they like this cultural battle. Let's have people yell at each other about guns. But really, the story is Americans agree about what to do about guns. That's the story. We actually agree.
President Obama is about to announce his latest plan for reducing gun violence.
Revealing his executive action in an effort to stop gun violence in America.
He's got an executive order out that would mandate these background checks.
People in the gun selling business must conduct background checks whether they're selling at gun shows or over the internet.
President Obama says he is taking action on gun control because he can no longer wait for Congress to do it.
It is with such great honor that I introduce to you the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and Vice President Joe Biden.
Thank you so much. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost brothers and sisters, or buried their own children. Many have had to learn to live with a disability, or learn to live without the love of their life. A number of those people are here today. They can tell you some stories. In this room right here, there are a lot of stories. There's a lot of heartache. There's a lot of resilience, there's a lot of strength, but there's also a lot of pain. And as I've said before, somehow we become numb to it and we start thinking that this is normal. And instead of thinking about how to solve the problem, this has become one of our most polarized partisan debates. Despite the fact that there's a general consensus in America about what needs to be done. We need to feel the fierce urgency of now, because people are dying. All of us need to demand a Congress brave enough to stand up to the gun lobby's lies. All of us need to stand up and protect its citizens. All of us need to demand governors and legislators and businesses do their part to make our communities safer. And if you make it hard for them to win an election, if they block those laws, they'll change course, I promise you. Until we have a Congress that's in line with the majority of Americans, there are actions within my legal authority to help reduce gun violence and save more lives. So let me outline what we're going to be doing. Number one, anybody in the business of selling firearms
must get a license and conduct background checks or be subject to criminal prosecutions. So the gun lobby may be holding Congress hostage right now, but they cannot hold America hostage. We do not have to accept this carnage as the price of freedom.
Well, I know that it's just the beginning. I hope that it's a huge impact. I hope that people aren't going to be fighting it, but you know, the reality is they already are. They are fighting it, and I don't understand why they would. This is the beginning. We need to keep moving forward.
Hopefully the 10,000 gun deaths a year become 5,000 and 2,000, and we can join the rest of the civilized world.
The country needs to use their voice and let their senators know that if they're not going to jump on the bandwagon with this, then their job is at risk.
This country does need a change. It's been a long time coming, and it's here now. People need to get behind this, and people need a vote.
It's not over, but you know, those small increments, we're moving forward. This executive action is good, but there still will remain like a loophole. So in Maine, we're looking toward a referendum to close the loophole on the background check. We're still going to go forward with that in Maine, put it to the voters.
You know, these are common sense measures that will save lives. And we are successful when we keep reminding people that this is what the majority of Americans want, and we never let them forget about what happened in Newtown and happens every day in the street corners of our cities.
The background check issue itself, out and around the country, is not that partisan and not that ideological, because it has this incredible support. Where it is, of course, still hard to get the support for it, and where it is partisan and polarized is in Washington.
Congress has done an incredible amount to protect the sellers of guns, and little, if anything, to do to protect citizens.
So now it's just a matter of closing the gap between the American public and our elected officials. We saw background checks put to the ballot in places like Washington State and pass overwhelmingly. Let this be a voting issue for you. Let this be something that you care about.
I was 6 years old when a white supremacist fired 70 rounds on our center, wounding me and 4 others. The only common sense way for me to recover and to continue on with my life was to turn to activism.
Make sure that the will of the people is known to Congress and that they eventually follow suit by implementing universal background checks.
You want to make something good out of a tragedy, and when people say, we really don't want other people to have to go through it, that's real.
If we don't change the laws, there's just going to continue to be more and more and more senselessly losing their lives, and more people living with chronic pain and chronic medical bills.
It's hard to fight with the lobbies, but the American people are a lobby.